All right, now let's take a look at another example. In this example, I want you to find the maximum value in a sequence. I mean, probably I'm going to pass either a list or tuple, okay? But it shouldn't matter. So it is going to be either a list or a tuple. And you need to find the maximum value. There is one restriction to this function, and that is that you cannot use max function. Simply, I want you to create the max function yourself instead of using the max function that Python provides to you. All right, so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to say def max, and then I'm going to take a variable, and that is going to be a sequence. Is again either a list or tuple. And then I am going to return the max value, so I put this return before I forget. So I know that I need to return something back to wherever this function is called. Okay, so in my main, I will go ahead and create a sequence. All right, my sequence is, let's say, it's just to store some numbers. Doesn't matter. Just create a set of numbers, and this is a sequence that we are going to pass to our function, and the function task is to find the maximum value, right? So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to call that function max, and I'm going to pass this. Actually, I'm going to change its name to max value, so I'm not overriding the max function in Python. So max value, and then I'm passing the sequence that I just defined to my function. All right. So for now, I'm just let's try this code, see what we get. So if I run it as it is, typo. Okay, so sequence, just fix that. All right. So if I run it as it is, I'm not going to get any output because first of all, I'm not returning anything, and second of all, for a value returning function, I'm getting a value back and I'm not doing anything with that value. All right. So if you want to see the result, you need to make sure you print it. Okay. And here, for now, let's ignore this restriction. And I'm going to say, all right, return the max value of sequence. Okay, so it basically looks at that sequence and returns the maximum value. All right, so now if I run it, I should see the max value. All right, simple, right? But there is this restriction. Again, you cannot use max function to do that. You need to basically go through that sequence yourself and traverse over it and try to find the max value and then return that maximum value. All right, so let's see how we can do it. Right, so I cannot use max, and one thing that I'm going to do, and something that makes sense, is since I have a sequence, I'm going to use a loop to traverse over that sequence, take each of the items, compare with my current max value. If it is bigger, I'm going to change my max value to something else. All right, so I'm going to start with a max value. Let's say your sequence is like all positive numbers, so I'm going to say max val is 0, right? So I'm going to start with 0 or anything else. Some like a small number. If your list or sequence going to be positive numbers, you can go with 0. All right, so now I'm going to set my loop. All right, you can either use for loop or a while loop. Since I have a sequence, it is simpler to go with for. So I'm going to say for item in my sequence, right? And so now if I simply say print item, I'm going to see all of the items that I have in that sequence. Okay, so 23, 5, 4, 64, 1, 34. Okay, I'm getting none because right now I'm not returning any value. Right, we will take care of that in a second. All right, so now let's get back to this loop. So I set my max value to 0 to start it, and then I'm traversing over that sequence. So now I have access to all of the elements. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check to see if my current item is bigger than the max value. If it is, then I'm going to replace or update my max value and assign the value of item to it, because item is bigger than my current max value, so I'm going to update my max value, right? So as you go, you basically check each of item. So in the first iteration, you are going to get 23. 23 is bigger than 0, so you are going to update your max value. So in this iteration, max value is going to be 23. You go to the next item. The next item is 5. 5 is not bigger than 23, so you just move on. Next item, 4. 4 is not bigger than 23, move on to the next item. 64 is bigger than 23, so you update your max value, it becomes 64, and the remaining items are not bigger than 64, so you're not changing your max value. So at the end, I want to return this max value, right? And if I do that, I will see 64, right? So I was able to write this max function myself instead of using Python max value. So you can maybe like compare their values. So you can say, what is my max value and what is Python max value, and that they should be same, right? So you got 64, Python gives 64 as well. All right. Uh, just a quick thing. In this example, you saw that I'm returning two values at the same time, and that is possible in Python. So if you want to return multiple value at the same time, you should be able to do that. But you need to separate them by comma if necessary. All right. So one quick thing here that you need to be aware of, and that is the fact that goes with return keyword. Whenever, like when you have a function and you have like if it is a value returning function, you need to have this keyword return in it. As soon as you get to return keyword, the function is terminated. You're done. You're not continuing with that function. You just exit that function as soon as you see return. All right. So in the past, I have seen many students that put return by accident inside a loop. If you do that, this loop is going to stop in the first iteration, because in the first iteration, you're assigning item value of 23. 23 is bigger than max value, so you are going to update your max value. It becomes 23, and then you're returning max value. Done. You're not going to move on to the next item because you reach return, right? So be very careful where you're placing that return keyword, because as soon as you see that return inside a function, you're done. Function is terminated. Whatever you put after that does not matter. Python is not going to go over those lines. So return, that means you got to the end of that function and done. So now if I run this, I'm going to get 23 instead of 64 because this function stopped in the first iteration. All right. So be very, very cautious when you're putting your return value, and that is very handy. Sometimes you want to stop as soon as you reach an item, and you can do that. Let's say we have a different function, and in this function we are looking for a specific value. All right, so find x. All right, so for this one I'm passing a sequence and a value to it. So I want to search the sequence to find my value. All right. So similar to the previous one, I'm going to traverse over my sequence, all right? But in this example, I am going to look for a specific item. So I'm looking to see if my item is equal the value that I passed to it, right? If that matches, I'm going to say return, and I'm going to return this. value exists. All right, but if you go about all of the items and do not find it, that means the value does not exist in that sequence, and you can simply say value doesn't exist. All right, so let's take a look at this example now. So I'm going to call this function find x, passing my sequence, and for now let's pass 5. All right, so I want to see if I have value 5 in this sequence. If I run it, I should get this string. Why? Because I'm traversing over that sequence. I'm comparing my current item in that sequence with the value that I'm looking for. If they match, I'm going to say return value exists. Okay, or exists. So that means function is terminated right there. So I don't care what I have after that. So we are not going to get to this line. So as soon as you see this, get to this return, you're done. All right, so let's run it. Here you go. Value exists. The value 5 exists. Now let's put something that does not exist in that sequence. So value 100 does not exist, and you will get this string instead, because you traverse over all of the items. You never had any cases in which your item was equal to value, so you always skip this line. All right, so after you're done with your loop, you get to this return and you say the value does not exist. So the fact in which you terminated a function as soon as you get to return becomes really handy in some cases in which you want to stop as soon as certain cases or certain condition is met.